Well, we're in the study of the first 3 chapters of Genesis. These chapters are just foundational to the Christian faith, and if you have missed, you want to catch up, I will send you my teaching notes online. Just give me your email address. But for the sake of time, because there's a longer passage today, we're going to jump in. I want to read the passage. It's not up on the screen. Just listen for repeated words and repeated phrases. One way to study and understand what God is trying to tell us through the text is to look for repetition in any language, especially in the Hebrew language. When words are repeated, it means this is important. Genesis chapter 1, we made it to verse 6. We're going to go all the way to verse 25 or 6 today. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And so it was. God called the vault sky, and there was evening, there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And so it was. God called the dry ground land and gathered the water. And the gathered waters he called seas, and God saw it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. And God saw it was good, and there was evening, there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw it was good. And there was evening, there was morning, the 4th day. And God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every living thing with which the water teems and that moves about in it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening, there was morning, the 5th day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that moved along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw it was good. And bless the reading of your word. There are 2 things that the creation account is meant to do. 2 things the creation account is meant to do. Number 1, it's to confront the dominant story of origin of the culture. And number 2, lead us to worship the one true God. Just leave that there. The text is not meant to be our primary way to defend or to confront evolutionary theory. That's not the purpose. That's not the intent of the text. Nor is God trying to show us what it would have been like to have been there when he created everything. The biblical creation story was written to confront the dominant story of origin of the culture. And let me explain what that means. This is so significant, it will make Genesis make sense to you. I pointed out in the very first week of the study, Moses is the author of Genesis. He's the author of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, the Pentateuch. Moses was raised up to lead the Hebrew people out of Egyptian slavery. 400 years of bondage and slavery in Egypt. They are now wandering in the wilderness. In more ways than one, the people felt lost. 400 years of slavery does that to you. And they are asking questions like, well, who is this God who led us here? Who are we as a people? And those questions would have been even more pronounced because the nations around them had answers to those questions. Answers for themselves. Their answers to those questions came from their origin story. The Egyptians, for example, believed that their god Nun was the god of the watery chaos out of which creation was made. Just show you a couple images of Nun. That is not just like really cool wardrobe. That is the symbol of water. And that is their god Nun. In the beginning there was only chaos. And out of the waters of chaos, Nun created life. That was their origin story. Next slide. And you see the god Nun out of the watery chaos raising up. That ship was called a bark. And those are all various gods of Egypt. And there were many gods in Egypt, including the sun god. When we understand the creation account according to the Egyptians, and then go to the Genesis text, it just pops off the page. Why is that? Because the word water occurs 10 times in this chapter. That is not a coincidence. When God gives this revelation to Moses and to the Hebrew people who are out just confused, bewildered, lost in the wilderness, he is not trying to show them everything that they need to know about creation. God is going out of his way in the creation account to show that water is nothing but a tool in his hands. He created the waters. He divided the waters. He directs the waters. He commands the water. The biblical account of creation demolishes the false origin story of the Egyptian culture by showing its God's superiority, Elohim's superiority over none. God did the very same thing when he delivered the people through the 10 plagues that we read about in Exodus. A handful of you know this. You were in the Exodus study last winter. And we worked through the opening chapters of Exodus. And if you recall, there's just this bizarre series of 10 plagues. Just one after another. And it seems so bizarre until you realize that every one of those plagues was a full frontal assault on another one of the many false gods of the Egyptians. Why did God do this? Because the Hebrew people had been indoctrinated to believe the myths for 400 years. It had become their dominant origin story in their beliefs. And now they're out in the wilderness with this God saying, I have led you here. And they're going, who? Who is this God who? And there's this biblical story of creation. Okay? So you might be thinking, okay, I suppose that's interesting, but so what? Great question. Seriously, great question. In studying the Bible, we always begin by understanding the passage in the historical context to the original audience. What did it mean to them? Then we bridge that. We bridge from that context to modern day, and we ask, so what? So what? We're not ancient Egyptians. We don't believe in myths like Nun. We don't create origin stories. But think about that. Yes, there was a time when most people across Europe and the Western world would have said or would have answered, where did you come from? They would have pointed to the Genesis text and said, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's where we began. Genesis was our dominant cultural origin story. And then came a period of time in history called the Enlightenment, and we were awoke. A story was proposed that wrote off God as creator, and we transitioned from one dominant origin story to another. That transition was propelled by Charles Darwin's book entitled The Origin of the Species, written in 1859, written in 1859. The book became the foundation of the evolutionary biology. It was not the first time that evolution ideas had been proposed, but after the book was published, it became the foundation of a brand new origin story, one without a creator. And that story radically shaped our culture. Time plus chance plus natural selection. That's the explanation for life. No need for God. And we are entrenched in an origin story in our society that is based on evolution. From the time a child enters elementary school, they are told there really is no designer. Natural selection, the evolutionary process, is responsible for design. It's the dominant story of our culture's explanation of origin. So dominant, in fact, that we are now being told it is the only origin story safe for public consumption. It is why, for example, the National Association of Biology Teachers writes this. This is their most recent statement about teaching evolution. Just as nothing in biology makes sense except in light of evolution, nothing in biology education makes sense without reference to the science of evolution. Just grab hold of the word science. We are a long, long way from the theory of evolution. That is why their statement goes on to say this: evolution should not be misrepresented as controversial or in need of critical analysis. Just think about that for a minute. Should not be presented as in need of any sort of critical analysis. And in case that weren't clear enough, their statement had something to say about other origin stories. They write this: science teachers must reject calls to account for the diversity of life by evoking non-naturalistic or supernatural notions, whether it is called creation science, scientific creationism, or intelligent design theory. In other words, accept this and shut up. But what about accept this and shut up? It needs no critical analysis. That is a very dangerous place to be. You don't get a right to even question this. What should be obvious is this: there is only one origin story that our secular culture, especially the National Association of Biology Teachers, will stand to listen to. Only one. And we are steeped in it. It is everywhere. It is oftentimes accompanied then by just a smug and condescending rejection of Christian faith. And I do this only because it makes me mad. Let's look at some of those statements. I call this the unholy trinity of atheism. We'll start with Richard Dawkins. Faith is the great cop-out. It is the great excuse to avoid the need to think and deny the evidence. Faith is belief in spite of the evidence, even perhaps because of the lack of evidence. Or Christopher Hitchens. Faith is the surrender of the mind. It's the surrender of reason. It's the surrender of the only thing that makes us different from other mammals. Or Sam Harris. We have names for people who have many beliefs for which there is no rational justification. When their beliefs are extremely common, we call them religious. Otherwise, they are likely to be called mad, delusional, or psychotic. Accept this and shut up. And if you don't, we will ridicule and disparage anyone who doesn't by calling you names. Ooh, very similar tactic used in politics today. That is the doctrine of, indoctrination. And that is censorship. No critical analysis of this. Actually, the issue is not science versus the caricature of faith that they present. I would argue that the real issue is not defending science. Atheists aren't defending science. They are defending an ideological commitment to atheism. Because the truth is, there are significant scientific arguments against evolution. Just Google it. Scientific arguments against evolution. And fascinating reading. And I'm not going to provide you with a comprehensive critique of evolutionary theory. Once again, Randy's a scientist. I'm an interior designer, if you were here last week. My intention is to get you to understand the concept of dominant origin story of a culture. And our dominant origin story right now is evolution. There is no master designer. There is no God. But I can't just walk away from it. Two scientific flaws in the science of evolution. And there are many more, but just hold on to these. Here's the first flaw, is the lack of evidence to support macroevolution. It's the missing link. Okay? The lack of evidence to support macroevolution. Macroevolution claims that all life forms come from one original life form that was generated from non-living matter. Billions of years ago, in the primordial soup, a single cell began to evolve. It became a fish. A fish grew legs. It became a frog. The frog grew wings. It became a bird. From a single cell, they don't explain where that living cell came from, the dead matter, but a single cell evolved into a monkey, that evolved into an ape, which evolved into Uncle Homer. Okay? Evolutionary theory is built upon the premise of macroevolution. And yet there are no transitional forms in the fossil records of paleontology to fill in the gaps in the fossil record of what we call the missing links. And that lack of observable scientific evidence for macroevolution, I should have defined that from the very beginning. Macroevolution is evolution from one distinct kind into another. One distinct organism into another distinct organism. And the lack of that evidence argues against evolution. What we do observe is this array of very distinct kinds of plants, very distinct kinds of animals, many variations within each, but there is this clear and unbridgeable gap between the kinds, which makes that repeated phrase in Genesis very telling, doesn't it? And God created according to their various kinds. 10 times that Genesis account, that creation account says that. God created each according to their various kinds. The lack of macroevolution support. Another reason evolutionary theory is scientifically flawed is it ignores the second law of thermodynamics. Randy will tell you it ignores the first one too. But the second law of thermodynamics is the law of entropy. And the law of entropy states that there is this natural flow from organized to unorganized, from complex to random, from new to worn out. The universe is winding down. But evolutionary theory claims just the opposite. Time plus chance plus natural selection leads to increasing complexity of life from the single cell all the way to man. Well, don't know if that just confused you. There's so much more that could be said. The frustrating aspect of the discussion actually is this. Dr. Stephen Myers wrote, the really odd thing about this debate right now, the debate between origin stories of evolution versus creationism, the really odd thing about this debate right now is that just the point where leading evolutionary biologists and theorists are acknowledging that neo-Darwinism is in serious trouble, and it is, because the more we learn about DNA and the complexity of life, we know there's a designer. So right at that very point where neo-Darwinism is in trouble because of how scientifically flawed it is, we have theologians and pastors saying we need to embrace Darwinian evolution lest we lose credibility in a secular world. That's maddening, because we're not gaining credibility. All we're doing is accommodating to the lie. We lose credibility when we're not loving, when we're not kind, when we're not acknowledging we have a creator. But I like the philosophical argument in all of this. Because if there is no designer, and all we are is just the latest stage in this process of genetic mutation, then we have no choice but to embrace inherent purposelessness in life. And I know atheists would disagree, but again, I would have that philosophical argument with them. Life no longer has inherent value or any moral framework to adhere to beyond just the social constructs of we have to get along. If we do away with creation. In other words, our current culture's origin story is teaching us life doesn't matter. It doesn't. You live, you die. That's all there is. And with our current origin story as a basis for what we believe about ourselves and the world, I would argue, is it any wonder that we're sort of increasingly unfazed by millions of abortions? Or that we're surprised when people walk into a mall and just start shooting? Or is it any wonder, with this story as the basis of our culture, that suicide rates continue to climb, that anxiety and depression and hopelessness are epidemic in our culture? And despite the luxuries and the comforts that our affluent society affords us, you would think that it's not the case, but it is. We are more hopeless and more purposeless and more depressed than ever before. It's almost like this story is toxic to us. It's like it's poison permeating through the world, like we weren't designed for the story. Evolution steals, kills, and destroys. The biblical creation account points us to what is good because it points us to God and leads us to worship. Here's a passage just hang on to for, as again, that unholy trinity of atheists, Dawkins, Hitchens, and Harris. Romans chapter 1. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew of God, they knew of God. They knew of the intricacy of creation, the complexity of creation. Design argues for a designer. There's evidence for a designer. For although they knew of God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile. Your thinking became futile. Your foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Josh McDowell says that should be written over every university doorway. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Creation is like this big flashing arrow pointing to the Creator. And as we understand that, we have a personal Creator. As we understand that, we sense I was created for a purpose. Created in need of Him and for Him and by Him. Creation draws us to worship the Creator. Which leads us to the question, what is then so threatening to the evolutionist about explaining intricate design by way of a divine designer? Why are they so opposed to that? It's not science. If the biblical account of creation is true, then there's a Creator to whom we are accountable. That's the bottom line. Evolution provides a basis for explaining life apart from God and permits people then to exalt themselves as master of their own life. And God just won't allow that. He loves us too much to allow us to be that prideful. And eventually He gives you over to the hardness of your own heart. Creation leads us to worship the one true God. So, invite the worship team back up. I'm going to read for you Psalm 136. You can go there later. Interesting psalm when you read it in light of the creation story and the Exodus story. But Psalm 136, give thanks to the Lord for He is good. He is good, Genesis 1. Everything He creates is good, for His love endures forever. Give thanks to the God of gods. He's above all the Egyptian gods of those lesser gods. His love endures forever. Give thanks to the Lord of lords. His love endures forever. To Him who alone does great wonders. His love endures forever. Who by His understanding made the heavens. His love endures forever. Who spread out the earths upon the waters. His love endures forever. Who made the great lights. His love endures forever. The sun to govern the day. His love endures forever. The moon and the stars to govern the night. His love endures forever. The psalm continues on for another 17 verses, recounting now the events of the Exodus with that same refrain, and His love endures forever. And it concludes with, give thanks to the God of heaven. His love endures forever. Stand up, guys, and let's sing together. This is our closing prayer and act of worship this morning. Please sing out.